Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born in Milwaukee on May 21st, 1960, into the household of Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. He wanted for nothing in his formative years and was a mostly happy child until the age of 6, when a minor surgery to correct a double hernia seemed to effect a change in the boy. Following Dahmer's surgery, which coincided with the birth of his younger brother, he became increasingly insular and lacking in self-confidence. Around the same time, a career opportunity for his father resulted in the family moving to Ohio, and the boy's insecurities deepened. By his early teens, he was disengaged, tense, and largely friendless. Dahmer claims that his compulsions towards necrophilia and murder began at the age of 14, but it appears that the breakdown of his parents' marriage, their acrimonious divorce, and the psychological stresses associated with these events may have been the catalyst, turning these earlier thoughts into actions. Just after he graduated from high school in June 1978, Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks and took him home to his parents' house, where he proceeded to get the young man drunk. When Hicks tried to leave, Dahmer killed him with a blow to the head with the barbell. He dismembered the corpse of his first victim, packed the body parts in plastic bags and buried them in the woods behind his parents' house. It would be another 9 years before he encountered his second victim. Around the time of his first killing, Dahmer's alcohol consumption had spun out of control. In 1979, after only one term at Ohio State University, Dahmer dropped out due to his drinking problem. His recently remarried father insisted that he enlist in the army. He was sworn in December 1978 and was posted to Germany shortly thereafter. Dahmer's drinking problem persisted, however, and in early 1981 the army discharged him for alcoholism. Although German authorities would later investigate possible connections between Dahmer and murders that took place in the area during that time, it is not believed that he took any more victims while serving in the armed forces. Following his discharge, Dahmer returned home to Ohio, where he exhumed Hicks's remains, pulverized them with a hammer, and scattered the pieces even more wildly in the woods. An arrest later that year for disorderly conduct prompted his father to send Dahmer to live with his grandmother in Wisconsin. But his alcohol problem persisted, and he was arrested again for disorderly conduct the following year. His next arrest occurred years later in September 1986, but this time he was arrested for masturbating in front of 2 young boys. He received a 1-year probationary sentence. In September 1987, Dahmer took his second victim, Stephen Turney, whom he met in a gay bar. They checked into a hotel room and drank heavily, and by the following morning, Turney was dead. Dahmer claims to have found Turney dead beside him when he awoke. He bought a large suitcase to transport Turney's body to his grandmother's basement, where he had sex with and masturbated on the corpse before dismembering it and disposing of the remains in the garbage. His remains were never found. Dahmer's killing spree lasted for more than 13 years. During that time, he sought out mostly African-American men at gay meeting places, lured them home with promises of money or sex, and fed them alcohol laced with drugs before strangling them to death. He would then engage in sex acts with the corpses before dismembering them and disposing of them, often keeping their genitals or skulls as souvenirs. He frequently took photos of his victims at various stages of the murder process, so he could recollect each act afterward and relive the experience. The reenactment sometimes included assembling the skulls and masturbating in front of them to achieve gratification. Dahmer's grandmother eventually tired of her grandson's late nights and drunkenness, although she had no knowledge of his other activities, and in September 1988 she forced him to move out, though not before he had killed another 2 victims on the premises. Around the same time, Dahmer had an extremely lucky escape, an encounter with a 13-year-old Laotian boy, resulted in charges of sexual exploitation and second-degree sexual assault for Dahmer. He pleaded guilty, claiming that the boy had appeared much older. While awaiting sentencing for his sexual assault case, Dahmer temporarily moved back in with his grandmother, again put in her basement to gruesome use. In March 1989, he lured, drugged, strangled, sodomized, photographed, dismembered and disposed of Anthony Sears, a young African-American man and aspiring model. In May 1989, at his trial for child molestation, Dahmer was the model of contrition, arguing eloquently in his own defence about how he had seen the error of his ways and that his arrest marked a turning point in his life. His defence counsel argued that he needed treatment, not incarceration, and astonishingly, the judge agreed, handing down a 1-year prison sentence on day release, allowing Dahmer to work at his job during the day and return to the prison at night, as well as a 5-year probationary sentence. Lionel Dahmer later stated that while his son was incarcerated, he wrote a letter to the court that issued Dahmer's sentence, asking that he get psychological help before being paroled. However, Jeffrey Dahmer was granted an early release by the judge after serving only 10 months of his sentence. Dahmer spent 3 months with his grandmother following his release, during which time he does not appear to have added to his body count. He moved into his own apartment in May 1990. Over the course of the 15 months that followed, Dahmer's victim count accelerated, with 12 more lives taken in the same manner as his previous victims. Necrophilia is genuinely associated with issues of exercising control over victims. Dahmer developed these rituals as he progressed, experimenting with chemical means of disposal, and he also consumed the flesh of his victims. He attempted crude lobotomies, drilling into victims' skulls while they were still alive and injecting them with muriatic acid to see whether he could extend his control to the living. Most of these victims died instantly, but he claimed that one victim had survived for a number of days in a zombie-like state, with limited motor function. He was careful to select victims on the fringes of society who were often itinerant or borderline criminal, making their disappearances less noticeable and reducing the likelihood of his capture. There have been claims that he was racially motivated, as most of his victims were African American. However, it is equally likely that his victims were simply part of the demographic of the poor neighbourhood in which Dahmer lived and not carefully selected. Race did, however, figure largely in the case of Dahmer's 13th victim, a 14-year-old Laotian boy who was coincidentally the younger brother of the boy he had been convicted of molesting 3 years earlier. On May 27, 1991, Dahmer's African-American neighbour, Sandra Smith, called the police to report that a young Asian boy was running naked in the street. When the police arrived, the boy was incoherent and they accepted the word of Dahmer, a white man in a largely poor African-American community, that the boy was his 19-year-old lover who had too much to drink, over the protestations of Smith and her daughter, who could clearly see that the boy was terrified of Dahmer. Smith's subsequent inquiries through the local authorities were also not taken seriously. The police escorted Dahmer and the boy home, and clearly not wishing to become embroiled in a homosexual domestic disturbance, took only a cursory look around before leaving. Once the police left the scene, Dahmer strangled the boy and proceeded with his usual rituals. Had they conducted even a basic search, police officers would have found the body of Dahmer's 12th victim decomposing in the bedroom, and enough photographic evidence to immediately arrest the serial killer. After killing 4 men, Dahmer's luck finally ran out on July 22, 1991, when 2 Milwaukee police officers picked up Tracy Edwards, a young African-American male who was wandering the streets with a handcuff dangling from his wrist. They decided to investigate the man's claims that a weird dude had drugged and restrained him and arrived at Dahmer's apartment, where he calmly offered to get the keys to the handcuffs. Edwards claimed that the knife Dahmer had threatened him with was in the bedroom, and when the officer went in to corroborate the story, he noticed photographs of dismembered bodies lying around, which included one of the head in the fridge. He shouted to his colleague to restrain Dahmer, who fought back fiercely, but was nevertheless subdued. A subsequent search revealed the head in the fridge, as well as 3 more in the freezer, and a catalogue of other horrors, including preserved skulls, jars containing genitalia, and an extensive gallery of macabre photographs. Given that the majority of Dahmer's victims were African American, there were considerable racial tensions, and his trial began on January 13, 1992. Under the strictest of security, which included an 8-foot barrier of bulletproof glass that separated him from the gallery. The inclusion of only one African American on the jury provoked further unrest, but was ultimately contained and short-lived. Lionel Dahmer and his second wife attended the trial throughout. Despite having confessed to the killings during police investigation, Dahmer initially pleaded not guilty to all charges. However, against the advice of his legal counsel, he changed his plea to guilty by virtue of insanity. His defence then offered every gruesome detail of his behaviour as proof that only someone insane could commit such terrible acts, but the jury chose to believe prosecutors' assertion that Dahmer was fully aware that his acts were evil, but that he chose to commit them anyway. On February 17th, 1992, they returned after only 5 hours deliberation to find him guilty, but sane on all counts. Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, or 957 years in prison. Dahmer reportedly adjusted well to prison life. Although he was initially kept apart from the general population, he eventually convinced authorities to allow him to integrate more fully with other inmates. He found religion in the form of books and photos sent to him by his father, and he was granted permission by the Columbia Correctional Institution to be baptized by a local preacher. On November 28, 1994, in accordance with his inclusion in regular work details, he was assigned to work with 2 other prisoners, Jesse Anderson, a white supremacist and convicted murderer, and Christopher Scaver, an African-American prisoner who was a diagnosed schizophrenic serving a life sentence for murder. 20 minutes after they had been left alone to complete their tasks, guards returned to find that Scaver had crushed Dahmer's skull and fatally beaten Anderson with a metal bar from the prison weight room. Following his death, the city of Milwaukee was keen to distance itself from the horrors of Dahmer's actions and ensuing media circus surrounding his trial. In 1996, fearing that someone else might purchase Dahmer's fridge, photographs and killing tools collection and start a museum, they raised more than $400,000 to buy his effects, which they promptly incinerated.